Yeah, there it is.
Ah,
It's there.
it's in town.
Alright. Yeah. We're good.
Okay, good morning. This is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and it is Wednesday, April 8th. And we are starting today with hearing from folks on H915 about setting up a Senate Producer Responsibility Organization for beverage containers. And we are joined this morning remotely by Ms. Collins, who is the president of the Container Recycling Institute. I don't know if you're there. Oh, maybe you are there. Oh, you're there. Hello, good morning.
Hello. Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. If it's time to start, I did send in a PowerPoint presentation, and I don't know if I can run that from my computer or what the logistics are there.
You don't find it. Did you just send it?
Yes, I did just send it.
Oh, okay. You don't
Sorry,
think-
it's 6 a.m. here. It's still dark.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you for joining us at an early hour.
Should I try to share it from my position?
Yeah, well, can you do that if I don't have it here? Maybe, I don't know. I've never done that, so we'll try. That's the most for the effort. Maybe she can do that. Yeah, she's not. I'll post it as soon as I get it.
Is this working?
Oh, yes, we can see that.
All right, let's carry on then. Thank you again for having me. Good morning, everyone. And I am Susan Collins, president of the Container Recycling Institute. We're a nonprofit that has existed for 35 years that studies the best practices regarding recycling of packaging materials. And I thought that since I would be leading off today, that it would be best to talk about the general benefits of beverage container deposit programs. This is the data from 2023, and you can see the 10 states around the US that do have beverage container deposit programs. At this time, they had redemption rates ranging from 38% to 86%. Yes?
So I'm wondering if your slides are advancing because we are still just seeing the first one.
I have no idea why that would be happening. I'll go back.
I can still get hers, yeah, so.
It says my screen sharing is paused. Thank you for letting me know. Resume. Let's see if that's working.
There we go.
There it is.
Much better.
Oh, thank you so much for telling me. There we
Yeah,
go.
no problem. Great.
So I call these programs the rock stars of recycling because they achieve such high recycling rates. And I've been in recycling for 35 years. There's nothing else no other type of program I can implement that can achieve these kinds of recycling rates.
Oh, we have a question in the room. Yes.
Oh, yes, of course.
For clarification, if you could go back to the previous slide.
Yes.
You said rock stars for high recycling rates, but your slide says redemption rates. And maybe this is just me, but I think of redemption as deposit return and recycling as you just recycle it as center. So I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying here.
You're absolutely right. These are the redemption rates. They
Okay.
do also translate into the recycling of the materials, the physical recycling, turning them into new things.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just want to make sure I understood that.
Absolutely. All right, we'll carry on. So the other benefits of deposit systems besides the high recycling rates is that they provide clean recycled materials for manufacturing, enabling closed loop recycling. They create jobs and new businesses. They shift the end of life costs to producers, so no taxpayer money is spent on these programs. They reduce litter. Keep America Beautiful found 50% reduction of beverage container litter in the states that have deposit return programs. They conserve energy and natural resources and greenhouse gases and prevent other types of pollution from manufacturing new containers. And they're very popular with the public, 75 to 90% approval rates in public opinion polls. So continuing on with these general facts about beverage container deposit systems, these are the recycling rates by deposit status in the United States. Very high recycling rates for deposit containers in the United States and much, much lower recycling rates for containers that are not on deposit throughout the United States. Also, the economic benefits of bottle bills, the material itself, if you ton for ton, if you collect it through a different system where it's contaminated, of course, the contaminated material is worth less. PET plastic exhibits this, so does curbside glass. Curbside glass it costs $20 to $40 a ton to recycle compared to deposit glass that has a $20 per ton scrap value. It has an actual positive value. So the same exact material, if you handle it properly and it has no contamination, it can sell for a much higher price, and that brings more economic development to the state. There are benefits to the municipalities. Massachusetts, several years ago, they did a study that estimated the cost savings to the municipalities for the current program, how much they're saving. And those cost savings come from reduced collection costs, reduced landfill costs, reduced processing costs, and reduced costs for pickup of litter. And then there are additional savings they didn't quantify from storm drain cleanout. Internationally, these programs are taking off like crazy since 2017. What you see in blue is the places that had implemented these programs before 2017, and then implemented or pending 2017 to 2027, more than doubling. It'll be a tripling of these programs worldwide by 2030. And so you can see that the new programs there in yellow. I have some more highlights on this next one. This is showing the number of people covered by container deposit laws worldwide. Just this month, Singapore started their program last week, and Portugal's program will begin at the end of this week. And then there were also recent program starts in the last year or so in Ireland, Hungary, and Kosovo. So these ideas are spreading like wildfire. Now, getting to the specifics of H915, we wrote a letter that we took a careful look at the legislation and compared it to what we know about producer responsibility organization type legislation and the key elements that any type of legislation needs to have. And we found 20 points that we are recommending that be amended in the legislation, from definitions to giving the proper authority to the state agency, just very common things that would be on any checklist for any producer responsibility law. We do want to point out that some mistakes have been made in Maine and Connecticut. Connecticut's modernization law required beverage distributors to form a PRO, but they did not do so. That all happened just in the last few years. Fortunately, there was a very strong fallback. The distributors were already required to have the individual responsibility of taking back containers, so it didn't cause a collapse of the system. But I want to point that out, that this, some of these same companies that are the beverage distributors in Vermont are the same as the beverage distributors in Connecticut, and this just happened in the last few years. So there was modernization that was expected by the funding that was provided to the beverage distributors, but that did not happen. The only operational changes that happened in Connecticut were as a result of the grant funding that was provided by the state to redemption center operators and the redemption center operators themselves. In Maine, they're also struggling with this. The new law requires a PRO, but there have been many fits and starts on the implementation of that PRO and their producer responsibility organization stewardship plan. The program start date has been delayed. So our letter contains recommendations of amendments to the bill that will help you avoid these problems that they're experiencing in Maine and Connecticut. So these are some of the key recommendations. Number one, there's a problem with the timing of the handling fee. Dropping the handling fee before the program is actually implemented would leave a gap in time between when the plan is approved and when it is implemented. That would probably cause a collapse of the system by having the redemption centers with no funding source. And so we've got specific recommendations in our letter on how to avoid that problem. The second one is that there's no plan B having to do with the formation of the PRO. The natural thing that exists in most producer responsibility programs in the world is that if there is no producer responsibility organization, then the responsibility falls back on all of the producers to implement every part of the producer responsibility plan, or their own producer responsibility plan. We've also got an example here in Oregon of how producers had not joined the central organization, and new penalties were put in place to encourage them to join. And you can see here that before the law, more than 130 distributors in Oregon were not participating in the PRO. After the implementation of these new penalties, only 16 producers remained outside of the PRO. We've got the specific references to the specific Oregon statute so that you can mimic that if you choose. We've also got a recommendation to not allow the dissolution of the PRO as an option, because again, that would just collapse the entire system and leave people probably paying deposits with no way to get them back. Again, our letter has specific recommendations on that. I want to point to a success story to give some hope here that this can be done. It can be done well with the right legislative language and the right program operator in place. Back in 2023, I participated in a recycling study tour that went to Lithuania, a very small country of only 3 million people. Prior to having a deposit return system there, 1/3 of the beverage containers were returned for recycling. And once they established the program, they quickly went to a 74% return rate and then reached a 92% return rate in 2023. They set up their entire program and got it operating within 18 months, which was an incredible success story. They were very motivated and they did a fantastic job there. So I want to highlight that as a hopeful way that, reform can be achieved. And I'll stop here with our signature photo. And on the following page, I will say that we have contact information here. We have 2 websites with information on deposit return systems. You can access this information. Please feel free to contact us at any time with any questions that you have. And thank you very much. I'll stop sharing now.
Super, thank you so much. And so you referenced a letter, and this is something that hopefully you've also sent to our committee assistant?
I don't have anything.
Oh, okay. Apparently we have not gotten the presentation yet, but hopefully it will either come through soon or it might be worth
I asked
resending. Okay. Because I would love to see that. That'd be very helpful. And I'm very grateful for the practical suggestions of like, here's how you fix the bill that you've got. I was interested in your one comment about that there is no plan B. If the distributors don't form their own PRO. What I had interpreted as a plan B baked into the bill was if the entities fail, if no producer responsibility organization is formed, then then the secretary, basically the state can, as I understand it, put together a plan as a backup, and then the cost to join that is more than it would have cost them if they formed it on their own as a you know, means to like try to get people to join. Is that something that you're feeling like is that's not a sufficient plan B, or there's holes there, or I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
From what I've seen over the years with the state agency in Vermont, I don't see an appetite for the state agency to take over an entire program like that. There's very little operational capacity to even provide enforcement on the existing program. So I think there would be reluctance at best by the state agency, and probably not success. It would be much more successful to do what the other programs in the world do, which is to say, if the producers are not able to do this by forming and properly operating a producer responsibility organization, then the responsibility falls to each of the producers individually. They
Okay.
all have to implement this. That is where we have seen success in the past. It gives them sufficient motivation to work together rather than working independently. Although we always like having that option, because there will always be some producers that will have some unique method of operation where it makes more sense for them to take back their own containers in-house.
Mhm.
And you always want to give that opportunity to them if they have, you know, a much smaller operation or a very specific operation, to do their own take back. Let them do that as long as they're fully responsible.
That is very helpful. It makes me wonder too about having I'm very interested in what you're suggesting. It also makes me think about having a plan B and a plan C, you know, that somehow, and this is something we can talk about, so I'm just brainstorming at this point, but you know, thinking about if the state wants to come up with a PRO and say this is what we're gonna do, but in the absence of that, if they don't do that, then maybe, you know, plan C is is that every individual producer is responsible for taking back stuff on their own. But that might lead to some gray area of like, are they if the state puts it together, but it's either not enforced or insufficient somehow, that could be potentially problematic. So anyway, I'm thinking out loud here, but appreciate this suggestion. Yes, go
I
ahead.
just have a question, so on our website, we have the bill as introduced, and that's also the
Because
paper
it's-
copy I have.
It's a committee. That's why.
So that's it.
It was the committee.
So there was never
There was no amendment,
No.
right. So this is the as introduced is the same as passed by the House.
okay, I just wanna make sure I had that, okay.
Think that,
When
Okay.
it comes like that, though.
No, it is possible, certainly, it's a little
Yeah.
unusual on a 27-page
Yeah.
bill, but.
yeah, right.
Okay,
Fair.
I'll make sure I had the right
Yeah,
copy,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, okay. Great, any other questions for Ms. Collins? Okay, well, thank you so much. Really looking forward to checking out your letter and the suggestions that you have there. And if for any reason that, you know, we don't receive it, we'll follow up to say we can use that. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, and so we also are joined remotely by Bree Diley of Breezeway Consulting, the Beverage Association of Vermont. Welcome.
Good morning, thank you.
Yes.
Chair Watson and Vice Chair Williams, my name is Bree Deatley. I'm a principal of Breezeway Consulting. I live and work in Somerville, Massachusetts. And I am representing here the Beverage Association of Vermont, which are the non-alcoholic beverage distributors and producers in the state. Coke and Pepsi are our main members, KDP and Polar Beverages as well. I've been doing work on the bottle bill and research on bottle bills and activities around bottle bills for quite a few years, dating back to the 19 somethings. I've done a number of specific research projects in Vermont, working in collaboration with DEC, with DSM Environmental, who's done a number of studies for the state. And on a different side, I also am the general manager of the commingling program, the Vermont Commingling Group, which is the organization that manages the returns of about 84% of the returns that come back through the bottle bill today. That's a cooperative, an LLC, that the distributors got together to form, and I'll talk a little bit about what that organization does and how it sort of feeds into what we're looking at here with H915. A number of years ago, several years ago, a group of stakeholders were convened by Senator Bray, former chairman of this committee, to talk about reforms of the bottle bill. I was fortunate to be part of that group, along with VPIRG and stakeholders, redemption centers, TOMRA and others, which worked on a bill that eventually emerged in various forms, House 175, House 158, which we supported as a compromise measure amongst those stakeholders to move forward reforms. This bill shares a lot with that work and hopefully still has the support of a lot of the stakeholders that worked on those principles. Our sticking point ultimately with that bill was the lack of funding for us to implement the reforms and the technological changes that we feel are needed to sort of move the program forward. That's been addressed in part in this bill, and so I'm going to talk about that as we go on. I think really important to understand where the bottle bill is today in Vermont. The Vermont bottle bill is 55 years old. And frankly, despite incredible changes in how beverages are produced, distributed, how consumers behave, what the retail landscape is like, the Vermont bottle bill looks pretty much like it did 55 years ago. Containers are largely managed by hand. Our commingling group in 2025 took back 145 million containers for returns. About 133 of those were counted and sorted by hand. And that doesn't mean just that they came in the front door of a redemption center and were touched by the employee and then sorted. Those containers were handled probably 5 or 6 times in the course of getting them into the recycling system. Technology has virtually not penetrated the redemption system in Vermont. It has the lowest rate of technology use of any bottle bill state in the US except for Hawaii. About 2% of the containers in Vermont go through a machine where the barcode is scanned to recognize and identify who the distributor of that product was. Otherwise, we rely on manual sorting of those containers, where if you go into a redemption center and you look at what the folks behind the counter are doing, they're taking them, they're counting them from you, and then they're throwing them into wooden or cardboard boxes by distributor, by size, by brand behind them. And most redemption centers have something like 100 to 125 boxes back there that they're manually putting those containers into. Those boxes get pulled up into bags. A driver comes to that facility and individually picks those bags up, scans them, identifies them. They go to a facility where they're individually taken off, dumped onto a conveyor belt, and then they're actually counted through an automated process. That's an incredible amount of handling. It's a very inefficient system. And one of the things that we hope that H915 would be able to accomplish, and that we're really advocating for, is the implementation of much more technology in the system to reduce that amount of handling, to reduce the burden on redemption centers, to reduce their labor costs and their obligations to hire folks to do that work. It's hard work. The number of sorts that have to be done behind that is really difficult, and it's really difficult keeping all of the brands of craft beer and Ma and Pa's special soda, and every week there's something new coming into the market, and these poor folks standing back there trying to figure out which box to throw these into is really a crazy, crazy process, and something that we really need to modernize. I'll talk a little bit about how commingling addressed that, but in level setting sort of where we are with the program today, I also want to just keep the fraud issue in mind for you. Fraud is an issue that we deal with all the time in the redemption system, and even that our members deal with on the sales front. A lot of folks leave the state to buy beverages. As we know, a lot of retail business leaves Vermont to White River Junction and other places in the Connecticut River Valley to do their shopping because of fewer taxes, lower fees, no deposits in New Hampshire. And those containers come into the state. Research that's been done, including by me and others, have found that somewhere between 12 and 18% of everything that gets redeemed in the state didn't originate in the state. That equates to something north of 30 million beverage containers every year that are managed in Vermont's waste management system, but that were never purchased here. And that means that the distributors are paying out refunds and handling fees and paying for charges to pick them up and manage them on containers that they never sold. So we have a chronic fraud problem, as do most bottle bills. And it's something that I just want to have you keep in the back of your mind as we talk through the prospects for this bill and the program. The commingling program, which I manage, came about back in 2008, and it came about because of these very same issues that I'm talking about. Having to do all of this sorting by distributor and by brand was really putting a lot of pressure on the redemption centers. And there was a lot of pressure from them to do something about the level of sorting that was going on. And so the beverage distributors, the major distributors, at the time, Baker, Farrell, Calmont Beverages in Barry, as well as 2 Coke bottlers and 2 Pepsi bottlers that were in operation at that time, got together and formed an organization and agreed that what they would do is allow for all of their brands to be mixed together at the redemption centers. So if you have a 12-ounce can, it doesn't matter if it's Coke, Pepsi, Bud, Miller, Corona, whatever. All those 12-ounce cans can go in the same 12-ounce can bin. And that eliminated 50, 60, 70 sorts that the redemption centers were doing, which made a really big difference in their operations. At the same time, the law was changed to allow for those distributors to pay a lower handling fee to the redemption centers for those commingled products because they'd reduced the amount of labor and effort that the redemption centers needed to put in to sort them. Today, that program, as I said, manages about 84% of the returns in the state. And we do that through a cooperative arrangement where the producers give me data each month on their sales. And then I use that sales data in conjunction with Tamra, who does all the picking up and collecting in order to allocate out the costs of the system. It's been incredibly effective. I hear from redemption centers every time I'm out in the field visiting them, can't you get the rest of the containers into the commingling system? And that's really kind of what our motivation was originally in getting together with Senator Bray's group and in looking at this bill and supporting this bill, is trying to find ways to reduce the sorting and simplify the process. But what we're trying to do here, I think, is one more level up from that, and that is to introduce and deploy technology in the pursuit of making this system work better, work more efficiently, and work more fairly. Our focus, and you'll see in my written testimony when it comes in, our focus is twofold here. One is on the governance of these programs. And we feel really good about, we felt very good about the compromises that were reached in the previous bills that carry forward into H915 about the structure of the PRO. What the PRO really just does is consolidates the responsibilities and obligations of all of those distributors into one entity. And what that allows that single entity to do is to make much more efficient and coordinated decisions about how the system works. It's really hard for however many individual distributors there are registered in the deposit system today in Vermont, for them to coordinate and make simple decisions. I'm able to work with our 6 member companies in the commingling group because they're have single points of contact. I can routinely get sales data from them. We can manage the system really well. But it's been very difficult to bring more companies into that system because it's difficult to wrangle those different members. They all have different modes of distribution, and it's just been very complicated to do that. But a single organization that everyone is obligated to join is a very different situation, and that's really where we want to see the system go. That is a best practice. Susan said the same. It's how other organizations around the world are largely structured. The US is kind of unique in not having PROs run the deposit systems. We really only have one in the US, and that's at this point, and that's in Oregon. So that governance is really important for us. And the second thing that I want to spend the rest of my time kind of talking about is the issue of investment and technology. As I said before, we held out in opposition to House 158 last session because that bill didn't provide for any funding for any technology and innovation in the system. We're talking about having to make pretty significant investments in programs. And some of you, as many of you recall or know, several years ago, the state decided to take the unclaimed deposits away from the distributors and transfer them to environmental purposes, other environmental purposes in the state. Vermont joined a number of other US states that do take the unclaimed deposits away from distributors and use them for other purposes. That is not a common practice in the rest of the world. It's also not a common best practice that's outlined by organizations like Susan's or like TOMRA or others who work in the space of deposit systems. These systems really should retain the unclaimed deposits within them to turn that money back into helping to fund the system. And that's the way these systems work all around the rest of the world. For various reasons, certain US programs have decided to pull that money out. And without access to that money, it makes it really hard to make investments. So in this current bill, what you see is a compromise proposal where DEC would get a certain amount of money over several years from that environment fund, be able to provide up to $3.5 million of grants to this organization to make investments in technology. And that's really key for us because our ability to effectively put commingling into place for all of the distributors in the state and to make the whole system really not require any brand sorting anymore is to use technology to determine what's coming back instead of having people individually handle and count containers. So what we did was we went out to some outside consultants who had experience with deposit systems around the world and said, hey, here's the Vermont system. I know a lot about it. Here are the parameters of the system. What would you do? Give me more than a napkin, cocktail napkin plan, but not quite a business plan. What could we do with, some of the unclaimed deposit money to invest? And the answer came back to essentially build out a technology forward system that would operate at the current redemption systems, current redemption centers, focusing on the largest ones first, and putting technology in those facilities that would automatically scan and process large quantities of those containers all at once. There's technology there, bulk reverse vending machines. Many of you are familiar with the machines in the foyer of the supermarket when you go that you can individually feed a bottle or can into. These are machines that you dump entire bags into, and in a matter of seconds, they've cleared out all of those containers and you can dump another bag in. So it allows for a really high throughput, but what's happening behind the wall of the facility is every single one of those containers' barcodes is being read. And whose container that is and who's responsible for paying the fees on that is all being processed through the technology and turned over to the PRO, to the organization that's running the system. That allows for a lot more integrity of the system. It allows for a lot more detail about whose containers are actually coming back. And that's really how we see the plan moving forward to invest. And it's why the investment and the grant component of this bill is so important to us in ensuring the viability and practicality of the system going forward. Making the kinds of changes that we need to make to the system, whether it's relating to a single PRO instead of relating to the commingling group today, and then all of the individual distributors, all of that changed, implementing technology, even retrofitting redemption centers to handle the technology, which would be the responsibility of the PRO. All of that's going to be difficult, and we fully appreciate that. We had input from the redemption centers as we developed the original compromise bills. We know that change is going to be difficult, but not making these changes really could have adverse consequences for the long-term viability of this program. We can't just keep making people hand sort hundreds of millions of containers and hope that we can find the staff to do it, And, B, have trucks driving around the state that are just basically carting bags of air. We've got full cans and full bottles that have been hand sorted that go into bags that go into trucks. If that material was compacted in those machines at the point of redemption, that material could go consolidated in those trucks. You could put significantly more in those trucks. There'd be fewer trucks on the road. They wouldn't need as many drivers. We can really drive a lot of efficiency in the system if we have a centrally coordinated program to do it, and we have access to the funds to do it. So that's why we're supporting this bill. We do have some suggestions. They're fairly detailed. They're fairly minor, that we can talk to folks about. Some of Susan's suggestions with regard to changing the date on the handling fee, perfectly reasonable idea. So I think there are some little tweaks, but the core elements of the bill, we support and think are a natural next step in the evolution of the program here. Again, as someone who gets their hands dirty, literally, if not figuratively, if not literally, in the commingling system, this is really something we need to do. Commingling bought us time. Commingling bought us 15 years essentially of a lot of reduced sorting. But the redemption centers, the space that it takes, the staff that it takes, we really need to address that. And until we do that, the program really can't move forward and be successful, and frankly, and be a good program for consumers, to be something that consumers want to participate in. They don't have to wait as long for. There's a lot of innovation out there and a lot of technology that we can take advantage of. And so that's why I'm here on behalf of the members to support it. And I appreciate the time this morning and would be happy to answer questions about where we are today or where we'd like to see the program go.
Great. I think we have a couple of questions in the room. Senator Beck.
Yeah, Rick, thank you. So, first question is, what is the cost of one of these machines, this bulk return machines?
They vary. $100,000. A lot of them are not paid for outright. Some of them are paid through lease arrangements. What we would want to do would be to pay for them outright. Using funds that are provided through the grants. We didn't get, for the purpose of this project that we did, the feasibility project, we didn't get quotes on equipment. We just used sort of generally available information to our consultants as to what those costs would be. But our idea is that those would be purchased outright by the organization and basically placed in the redemption center. So, this would be a grant. The redemption center would simply be operating them. The PRO would be responsible for setting up the facilities, increasing their electric service, et cetera, that they would need, reinforcing floors, whatever would have to happen before you could put the machines in.
Okay, is there anything that prevents a Vermont redemption center from bringing in one of these machines on their own? It's a good economic decision for them maybe, and they just make that decision on their own. Is there anything that prevents them from doing that right now?
No, just economics primarily.
So the economics bad?
I'm sorry?
Are the economics bad? Would this be something that
there's kind of two issues. One is scale. You need to have a certain scale, a throughput of containers at your facility to kind of make these work, to pencil out financially.
Okay.
If you're covering the cost of them. We have redemption centers in Vermont that handle 1,000 containers a week. And we have redemption centers in Vermont that handle 1,000 containers every 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So what we're focusing on are those highest volume facilities where we know that the economics will pencil out for those facilities. And so there is a redemption center up in Hartwick, and I can't think of the name of it, that does have a bulk RVM. They've been using that.
Go up there and check it out.
As you look in other states and other jurisdictions, I was up in Quebec at the end of last year. They're building out a whole new infrastructure there, very technology driven. Actually, they're setting up their own redemption centers instead of relying on independent operators, which is a much more expensive prospect. But the machines that they're putting in and the throughput, they have facilities that are handling 35 million containers a year. The whole system in Vermont only handles 180. So Vermont's system in general operates at a much lower scale than a lot of these technologies and machines were designed for. So, we wanted to try to put a system in place that was Vermont scaled and Vermont sized and appropriate to that. And that's obviously has both economic and physical constraints. There are redemption centers where there was no way that you could put some of these machines in. There's simply not space for them.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Great, and Senator Williams.
Thank you for the testimony. So I'm looking at the Breezeway Consulting Beverage Association of Vermont. Are you actually in Vermont?
I'm in Massachusetts. I'm in Somerville, Massachusetts. I do. I'm a consultant. I work for the state association. I work for a number of state beverage associations around the country, but our LLC that runs the commingling group is actually a Vermont LLC that I formed, and I'm the general manager of that LLC. So I technically run that business in Vermont on behalf of the 6 distributor members.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator
So,
Butters.
what happens with the machines when people kind of throw everything they have into the bag and chuck it in, and a third of it doesn't barcode because
Yep.
it shouldn't be there in the first place? Who's responsible for dealing with what gets left at the backside of the machine?
Yeah, that stuff will, it actually it just like it does with if you go to a Price Chopper and do the same thing, if you put a container in that isn't in their system, it will give it back to you. And the bulk machines do the same thing, only they give it back to you. So there's sort of a return tray that comes out to the side that says, "Hey, this didn't work," and you get those back if you're standing there.
Okay,
So in this case, what we're envisioning is these would not be, it would probably not be the consumer doing the dumping of the bag. They would probably hand their bag or their box or whatever they come in with to an attendant who would sort of dump those in, and those would come back and those would be presented back to the customer. What often happens in that case, Senator, is the facility will often take those materials anyway. They just won't offer a refund for them. And they're bagged separately, and the pickup agent, which in Vermont is Tomra, will take those just as a scrap value product, so that they don't end up, outside on the street or wherever they might end up.
okay, so it's not liability for the redemption center.
It's not. No, they're not. And the Redemption Center is never liable for.
Well, I just meant the handling, so I get that they don't get paid, just the sounds like a bit of a liability if it's acute enough, but maybe not.
Yeah, and
That's
it usually amounts to they might accumulate a bag of plastic bottles. People put water bottles or something in by accident. You might accumulate a bag over the course of a week or two, and the driver will just sort of haul that off when he comes and give them, $1 for it or something like that for the scrap value.
okay.
I want to follow up on something that you mentioned about having some suggestions. If you do have a set of suggestions, that is certainly welcome, and would love to see that list. I assume you're sending your written testimony in to our committee assistant, and
Yeah, Chris Rice, who's our representative for the Beverage Association, will submit the written testimony.
Super. Great. Any other questions at this point? Okay, super. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and it looks like Mr. Smaha's from the Can Manufacturers Institute is not able to join us this morning. I don't know if Michael Noel is with us. So otherwise, I think we're going to take, yeah, we're gonna take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 10. Okay, all right, good morning. This is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and we are coming back from a break. And again, we are joined remotely by our next witness, Michael Noel from Tomra. And yes, hello, welcome.
Hi there, Chair Watson. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yes, I think so.
Great. Should I just jump into it?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, great. Excellent. Pull up some notes here. It's good. Hello, everybody. Chair Watson, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today on this important piece of legislation. I'm speaking on H915. My name is Mike Noel. I'm a public affairs director at Tomra. We are formally opposed to H915 because of its current form. It's changed since I last testified in the House, where we were largely in support. But I want to be clear, we support the overall objective of improving the program, and I can explain further on some of our more specific comments. By way of background, Tomra provides technology and services across Vermont's bottle bill system and has done so for decades. We provide reverse vending technology to stores and redemption centers, both the single feed machines you may have seen at grocery stores and bulk feed machines where you can empty an entire bag in at once and get repaid immediately, and you don't need to sort by material type. You can see an example of this technology today at Morrisville Beverage. We also recently brought Clink into the Tomra family last year, who offers a popular bag drop redemption service where you can drop off an entire bag at once of mixed containers and be paid back or donate your refunds to charity all on your phone. In addition, Tomra provides container pickup services on behalf of all beverage distributors in Vermont and processes those containers at a recycling facility in Essex. We also operate the clearinghouse that radically simplifies how deposit refunds and handling fees are exchanged between hundreds of distributors and stores and redemption centers in the state. Relevant to this conversation, I serve on the board of Maine's Producer Responsibility Organization for their bottle bill, also known as the Cooperative. And Tomra operates in all major deposit return systems around the world, including all 10 US states with such a program. So I'm bringing some of that expertise to bear here when discussing this bill. We support the idea of modernizing Vermont's bottle bill. The program has seen better days, mostly due to neglect from not updating the law earlier, which has stifled public participation and innovation. But modernization needs to reflect the reality that Vermont is not starting from scratch. There is current infrastructure and jobs that rely on the system continuing to work. This includes about 100 locations statewide, or over 100 that take back cans and bottles and put deposit money back in Vermonters' pockets every day. As I mentioned, the recycling processing facility in Essex relies on the public's easy access to return their containers. The pickup, processing, and recycling of containers, the billing of hundreds of distributors, and the payment of these 100+ redemption locations for different fees, all of this works. But it does so due to the way the law is written, and we need to be careful about a transition to a new entity and be honest about the conflicts of interest at play. I don't mean to suggest that Tomra is immune from this. We do generate revenue from the program today and can see a pathway to doing that in the future. But recognizing conflicts of interest and designing guardrails accordingly is a normal and necessary part of policy design. Regarding H915, I'll send more detailed language recommendations after the hearing, but I'm just going to summarize here. Our opposition is mainly related to the handling fee. Vermont has an existing redemption network, and it remains viable because stores and redemption centers are paid a handling fee per container they take back. Without this, redemption centers would close. This bill proposes letting the beverage industry propose fair compensation to stores and redemption centers as long as DEC approves it. That is the amount and that would be the amount for at least the next 5 years. We understand the beverage industry's interest and reducing costs in the system, and even respect the wisdom of removing the handling fee from the statute where it is static. But there should be more detail here so the legislature can be confident that this bill does not close redemption centers en masse. There's a few different options here, from adding in an arbitration section like we see in Quebec, having a separate body set the compensation amount like we see in Alberta, or allowing redemption centers to appeal to DEC if their costs have, been different than what is approved in the plan. But all we are asking for is the new compensation amount to be updated every 2 years. That's it. I think we can agree that costs do not stay static due to inflation, so neither should this fair compensation amount. This is important if the legislature or Vermonters expect to see the clink bag drop service or bulk feed RBMs. It is hard to see how it would be Tomer technology if there's not a viable market for innovation and fair compensation. The next topic is distributor approval. If you want to see redemption at transfer stations and for Vermonters to get their money back from a clink bag drop service or bulk RBMs, there would need to be a requirement for containers processed by this technology to be accepted by distributors and the PRO. We're not suggesting that any container redeemed through technology should be accepted, just legitimate containers. So this section would make it clear that distributors are not expected to accept fraudulently redeemed containers. So similar to the language in Maine law. The second one is also related to technology. In order for containers to be accepted through redemption technology, it's not enough that distributors need to sign up with the PRO. They also need to actually send in their barcodes, their universal product code, to the PRO, and for those codes to be made public. So we as the technology provider can evaluate the container, accept it or reject it, and either help the PRO do the billing or do the billing ourselves. So product registration needs to be added. The bill proposes allowing smaller retailers to refuse customers when they bring back containers. There's some logic to this, as the PRO is required to ensure a convenience standard is met, suggesting that some retailers can drop out, but retailers should only be allowed to drop out of the system once the convenience standard has been implemented, not just once DEP approves a plan to implement the convenience standard, if you understand the nuance there. And then convenience and operating hours. The bill eliminates the minimum opening hours when Vermonters can get their deposit money back from a return location. So these minimum hours should remain, and should at least apply to the locations that are required under the convenience standard, unless, perhaps a waiver is granted by the secretary. The risk here is the PRO is the only one operating redemption centers, or a redemption center in your county, and they can choose to keep it open for 1 hour a week, in an extreme scenario. And there's nothing in the law that says they need to stay open longer than that. And then, unless I read it wrong, the liquor section says the distributors only need to pay retailers a handling fee, but makes no mention of paying redemption centers a handling fee. So redemption centers will refuse liquor containers if they are not compensated for accepting them. And this is doubly important because the deposit value on liquor is 15 cents. And Vermonters are likely to be angry if they can't get their deposit money back. The bill's performance targets are based on what's called a redemption rate, and this should be defined. That's because if the PRO fails to reach the minimum redemption rate, it would be required to improve consumer convenience and education efforts. I guarantee there will be disputes over what the statute means by redemption rate, because it is not defined in this bill. We strongly recommend adding a redemption rate definition like Connecticut and Maine have. The timeline is unnecessarily long. It will not take 15 months to develop the first draft of the plan, for example. In Maine, this took 6 months.
Mr. Noel?
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, yes.
It's great that you're providing really specific suggestions, but we don't have your written testimony, and you're not referring to the places in the bill, so it's hard to follow what your suggestions are. Do you have your written testimony that you could submit? And could you at least tell us where in the bill you're talking about? Or when you're making suggestions?
I will be submitting detailed testimony with section and even language recommendations. I just haven't done so yet.
Okay.
Is there a specific topic I brought up you'd like to know? Which?
Well, you've gone through a bunch of them, so I was gonna ask you about the first one, but then you've mentioned multiple things, so maybe I can just look at your written testimony, but I don't feel like I know the bill well enough yet to follow along with what your suggestions are, so but just I guess carry on, and if you can just refer to specific sections from now on, that would be helpful.
Okay, I'm just reviewing the language. I haven't memorized the different like section numbers or anything like that, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I'm happy to, my formal testimony will have, the exact language in there. I'm also
Okay.
follow up if that's helpful. I believe I am wrapping up. There's two more comments here. There's a timeline. I believe it's towards the end of these actually, I do recall these 2 points are about section 1532, I believe, has to do with minimum plan requirements. There's a timeline in there, and when the producer responsibility organization needs to submit a plan, and then it says DEC approves the plan and then implements the plan, and there's dates in there. That timeline is unnecessarily long. It will not take 15 months to develop the first draft of the plan, for example. In Maine, that same step took 6 months, not 15 months. So what takes more time is the state agency and the PRO to agree on the final plan. And I'll provide a recommended timeline in my testimony. And then the actual structure of the plan approval process should follow best practices in terms of PRO oversight. So the bill should be very clear that DEC has the authority to send the plan back to the PRO for edit if it does not meet the minimum plan requirements set in the bill. So the PRO will be, just the nature of the industry, the PRO will be incentivized to put forward a first draft plan that does the bare minimum to comply. And then the state needs the authority to require edits so the statute's intent is fulfilled. This has been a painful process in Maine, but ultimately it is an important one. Otherwise, the PRO would submit a bare minimum plan, and it could be divorced from the requirements in the statute, and the state may not have the authority to require further edits. So it's an important piece. And I believe that's it. But again, our most important comment is on the handling fee, and how eliminating it without more clarity on what follows is extremely risky. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, certainly looking forward to getting your written testimony, but even so, these suggestions feel important and helpful. And I'm thinking about this last point that you've made about the eliminating the handling fee without knowing what's next. And so in your written testimony, I feel like I've heard from folks today that the timeline for eliminating the handling fee may be problematic, that it may not be going to the right people, the requirement to pay folks may not be going to the right entities, if it's the retailers versus if it's the redemption centers. And any other suggestions that you have around how the handling fee ought to be modified? I was also hearing your suggestions around if it's negotiated and it must be a fair compensation approved by DEC. I'm appreciating the suggestions around having either some kind of arbitration process or a separate body that sets the amount, or allowing an appeal process to DEC. I think those were all, interesting suggestions. Anything else that you would recommend around the handling fee?
Yeah, so that I mentioned those other options just for like the committee's understanding that there could if in other jurisdictions where there is no state set handling fee at an amount static set in law, there's way more detail in the legislation or the regulations to spell out how this works. And I'm not aware of any example where it's just pay a fair compensation amount, state agency approves it or not. And that's risky because we're putting a lot of faith in the beverage industry and DEC, and whatever administration is managing DEC to set a fair compensation amount. And so we're just raising that risk. That being said, we understand we want to be flexible. And so we are asking at a bare minimum that whatever that amount is, or that the approval process be required to update that handling fee amount every 2 years, which is and just you can leave it at that. And the intention there is to assume that fair compensation amount would be adjusted to reflect essentially inflation and cost of doing business. If you want to go further, or then there's more that can be done there. So for example, in Quebec, it's there's something in the law that says the PRO needs to pay for the full cost of redemption. And then it needs to agree on I think it needs to establish contracts with each return location. And then if the two sides, meaning essentially the retailers there and not agreed, and the dispute must go to arbitration. And there's a whole section in there that you could include. And that's flexible, and we understand the PRO in Quebec has come to an agreement with the retailers, and they've set it up. It's a little different than Vermont, where there is independent redemption centers, so it wouldn't be sufficient just to cover a redemption center's cost. They're not nonprofits. There would need to be, required to pay the cost in a fair profit or something of that sort, or a reasonable profit margin, something like that. Otherwise, redemption centers would close. So that's like one, kind of arbitration. The other one is Alberta, which is, and Susan Collins is more of an expert on Alberta than I am, but there's a separate body that sets the essentially the compensation amount to redemption centers regularly. I want to say it's every year or every other year. I'm not super familiar with who is on this separate body. I want to say it's quasi-public. And that's just a way to kind of create some extra focus on whatever this compensation amount is, and make sure that there's some public representation on that board. And so it's not just, we'll set it on a fair compensation amount and that's what it is for 5 years. So I think you're picking up on that. This is a tricky dynamic. We don't want to make it overly complex or, government overreach, but some additional criteria should probably be in the law, and all we're asking for is that it should be updated every 2 years.
Yes, go ahead.
Where in the bill is the handling fee? I see it on page 8 as related to the liquor, but I don't see it other places.
I just have the digital and word searching through it. I can.
On the paper copy.
Let's see here. Okay, so page 4 in the PDF, line 8 to 10. Page 4, line 8 to 10.
That's the only place it's mentioned.
It says that's where it shall not apply, and then
I'm just wondering where the setting of the handling fee is, because we've dealt with this in other places where setting of fees is kind of our responsibility.
So it's page 14, line 9. Actually, line 9 to 13.
Okay.
Oh, right, this is about how the handling fee is set.
I see. Okay.
Susan Collins said section 1522B eliminates can. Okay. 22. I didn't see that. I mean, actually, I think.
Yeah, it's like there's a B that maybe is not included
Yeah,
in the,
so it might have been a Florida or, I don't know.
Well, she's talking about page 3. Again, on the platform.
oh, 1522, there it is.
But they confuse the that's a place.
Yeah,
What's this planning, right?
yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions at this point? Or comments? Yes.
I'm just curious, because you said, Mr. Noel, that you supported the bill originally, and then now you're not supportive of the current. And I'm wondering, I guess, I don't know, it's maybe not a question for you, I'm just wondering what changed, or like why these changes were made, and so we should hear from local food.
So like earlier, but nothing's changed. We're still looking at the bill as introduced, right?
Yeah.
So nothing's changed.
Oh, this is,
Does he mean from a previous?
Yeah.
yeah, it was a committee bill.
It's true. Okay, so I think we may be able to question answer.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, Mr. Noel, about what changed in the process that you know made you go from supportive to unsupportive, or
Sure. So there was, so maybe the link online discussing or labeled as introduced is, I think, well, there was multiple versions in the House Natural Resources Committee that was, that were put forward. There was like a version 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. So the version I testified on was version 3.1. The public link has since been deleted. And now what is available is just this introduced version. The bill you see today is, I would say, is like 90% similar to what was in 3.1, but the enormous change is that fair compensation language that I highlighted on the handling fee. Previously, the producer responsibility organization was essentially still required to pay the handling fee as set by statute. This says the handling fee shall not be applied to any container managed by the PRO, and the handling, and it essentially will be replaced with this fair compensation amount. So that's a, you know, it's a fundamental change to how the system is funded.
Mhm.
I mean, if my understanding is this was, well, I'm not going to comment on why it was removed. I think you can ask the department.
So which version of that you were supportive of 3.1?
Largely, we were more, you know, kind of just more, we didn't have strong opinions on it. We thought it could work. We had some of the programmatic, you know, adjustments that I flagged in the latter half of my testimony. But this one, just because it has such a high, you know, I think it's possible it works out, but there's a 50% chance that it does not work out, and it actually really scuttles the redemption network.
So it was the committee work post version 3.1 that, in your opinion, is problematic.
Yes, that changes.
Great, okay.
And the fair compensation is on page 14.
Okay, sorry, I just am having a hard time finding bits in the middle.
And I think this is starting to sink in for me, right? Because right now, redemption centers are compensated based on a handling fee per container. And this bill eliminates that per container compensation and just goes to the PRO compensating redemption centers based on some contract or negotiated agreement.
Essentially, I mean, the bill doesn't even say that, doesn't even say contract, doesn't say negotiation. It just says the PRO shall propose in its plan how it will fairly compensate redemption locations, and the state shall approve that plan. So everything else is left up to interpretation.
Okay. So it's a fundamental shift in how redemption centers would be paid.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's some logic to doing that. You know, there's some arguments that, well, why would a PRO invest in, you know, say improvements or technology improvements at a given return location if they don't realize the cost, like let's say the labor cost savings from a redemption center utilizing that technology. And that's there's some argumentation, there's some validity to that argument, but it doesn't say that the you know, the PRO needs to cover the cost of redemption and a fair profit margin. It doesn't say it needs to be updated if inflation goes up. So there's just very little criteria there.
Okay.
And ultimately, there's a power imbalance here. The PRO will be able to put forward a good argument as to why the amount should be this. State agency isn't necessarily the expert on the program, so they'll say, well, that looks pretty good, we'll approve it. If that becomes too low and that is approved for 5 years, then, you know, do redemption centers have a recourse at that point? Not based on what's in the bill. They could just essentially close. So it's just, I think you can understand it's a bit vague.
Okay. Right, and so that is kind of the worst case scenario, is that we try to modernize this law and ultimately end up killing, you know, end up closing redemption centers. That would be quite awful.
Exactly, and I'm sure the legislature does not want to see that happen. We don't want to see that happen, so we're just, you know, raising that is a real risk. So there, you know, there should be some sort of guardrails here.
Yeah.
Senator Butters. To the guardrails, but the agency doesn't want these to close either.
Right.
So there is an incentive on the part of the agency to make this thing work, because the last thing anybody wants is to, we have a problem with enough redemption centers as it is. So I'm not suggesting we don't do guardrails, but that's okay. There's a deep incentive for the agency to make this place work. But
Well, there are some people who want it all to fail.
well, but so again, I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. It's been very helpful. Any other questions for Mr. Noel at this point, or comments? Okay.
Just want to see the written stuff.
Yes.
Find his suggestions in the bill.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, and so we're gonna move to Mr. Burns for the third. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Paul Burns. I'm the Executive Director of VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. I'm grateful for the opportunity to testify before you today. This is my 26th legislative session with VPIRG. I've talked about the ballot bill in most, maybe not every single one of those, but for a long time, and had worked on it when I was environmental advocate for Massachusetts before coming here. So a long time on the bottle bill, of course, I have been part of a lot of the conversations and negotiations that were discussed earlier by earlier witnesses, and I appreciate, want to say, the effort and focus that this committee is putting on the issue today, and that the House Environment Committee did before you, and it is worthy of your consideration. And like Bree Deatley, I would say, you know, there really is. There's not consensus around this bill as written, but there's a large consensus that changes need to be made, and disparate forces agreed, on a large chunk of what is here, and I view that as a very positive thing. And it is the result of literally years of conversation and negotiation and compromise. So I'm grateful, again, for the opportunity to be speaking to this issue. It is important to update the bottle bill program passed originally in 1972, the same year the VPIRG was founded. While we support the thrust of this legislation, there are some specific areas that we'll talk about that we'd like to see improved as well. But just a bit more background first. Again, what is commonly known as the bottle bill was passed in April of 1972, I believe. While we don't have exact numbers, a reasonable estimate based on what is the number of containers redeemed every year, reasonable estimate says that about 10 billion cans and bottles have been redeemed and recycled through Vermont's bottle bill program since it was passed. Lined up end to end, these containers would stretch about 947,000 miles. Senator Beck, that's enough to go all the way to the moon and back twice. We're talking about the moon launch around the moon earlier. That's remarkable. Just containers redeemed and recycled in Vermont all the way to the moon and back twice. The material collected through the bottle bill, the glass, aluminum, plastic, is of high quality and high value because it has been separated. It's not thrown in with a single stream recycling, which while convenient, the product is much less valuable. And it's not as readily turned into new recycled products as bottle bill material. And most folks will readily agree to that. It's difficult sometimes to find markets for material that is put into your blue bin at curbside. And consider, for instance, there was a 5-year period that the Chittenden Solid Waste District had illegally dumped what amounted to 18,000 tons of glass that it couldn't find a market for. That never happens with bottle bill material. So there's a huge difference when we think about, well, why not just put everything into your blue bin? Because we care about the environment, and economically, it's much better to recycle at the highest and best use these materials that people consume and then would like to see used again and be turned into another bottle again, for instance. Consider bottle bill glass as just one example. Scott DeFite, who I know was scheduled to testify today, wasn't available, but hopefully you'll hear from him again or at another time. He's the president of the Glass Packaging Institute. These are the people who actually recycle glass. As you know, the material recovery facilities in Vermont, they receive material, they separate it, and they send it on to someone else for actual recycling. These are the people that take the glass for recycling. A few years ago, in front of the Senate Finance Committee, his testimony, I'll just read you 2 sentences here. Please know that there is no comparison in the quality and breadth of end markets available to the glass collected through the bottle bill when compared with commingled curbside glass. The recycling rate is higher. The cost to process is less. The markets are more robust and within the region, and the yield is far higher. So again, if you care about recycling and all the benefits that come from that, the bottle bill is an excellent program for us. It's also true that recycling glass bottles into new containers rather than creating a bottle out of virgin materials from scratch, it reduces air pollution, water pollution, energy usage, and climate emissions. Again, far better to start with a bottle to turn it into a bottle again. In my ideal world, we would have reusable bottles again, and there are other benefits that come from that. And of course, we used to have bottles that were reusable. The only way to ever get there is probably through a bottle bill program where you're taking them back, in one piece. So that's a little bit further down the road. But it is also true that there are environmental benefits and economic benefits for recycling aluminum and PET plastic through the bottle bill as well. For instance, the Association of Plastic Recyclers recently said this on the topic, quote, bottle bills significantly increase the supply of high quality post-consumer plastic resources. No alternative mechanism has been identified to replace existing deposit laws that would provide a similar stream of consistent, high quality, high volume supply. The plastics industry saying this. I'm not often on the same page, but here they're saying if you want to think about creating recycled content, food grade recycled content, it's got to come from a bottle bill program, basically. Earlier this year, the Association of Plastic Recyclers Chief Policy Officer further emphasized this point, noting that approximately 60% of all PET plastic, that's soda bottles and water bottle plastic, collected for recycling in the US comes from the 10 states with a bottle bill. So 10 states producing 60% of the recycled content plastic because it is of a much higher quality than what you would get through a curbside program. Moving to the deposit, we just want to note the deposit was set at a nickel in 1972 and it remains 5 cents today. Of course, the buying power of the nickel has changed since 1972. It would be about 39 cents as we sit here today. Well, I did this last week calculation, but somewhere around 39 cents today. Still, the promise of that deposit being returned, plus the understanding that recycling these clean containers is a good thing for our environment, continues to produce pretty remarkable results in Vermont. So there is no increase in the deposit in this bill, to be clear, and Vermonters still return these containers. Tens of thousands of Vermonters redeem containers regularly. In fact, about 72% of the containers that are covered by the law are returned for deposit each year. And the program has maintained remarkable public support as well. In the last 2 statewide polls that VPIRG commissioned on this, one about 5 years ago, the other about 15 years ago, almost 9 out of 10 Vermonters said they supported the current program. And 5 years ago, another 83%, so I think it was 87% supported the current program. I think 83% supported expanding it to include other containers that were not in the program. But after 54 years, it is fair to say it could use an update. You've heard some of the reasons for that already. The program is not as efficient as it should be, and it's harder to redeem containers in Vermont. Redemption centers are in many cases struggling financially. They face rising costs, including a regularly increasing minimum wage, while income derived from the handling fees remained unchanged for years. Well, Vermont's followable program has just really failed to keep pace in terms of modernization as other states have done. And H 915 takes some important steps to update. Again, I want to stress there is nothing in this law to expand the scope of the law or to change the deposit. But still, through this legislation, we can see important updates that would improve the overall function. Regarding the PRO, the Producer Responsibility Organization, this was a suggestion from the beverage industry. Bree Deatley mentioned it earlier. It was the former chair of this committee who brought 5 or 6 of us together in the last biennium to negotiate a path forward. This wasn't our idea, but VPIRG ultimately agreed to it as part of those negotiations around the last legislation. And we remain open and even supportive of this approach as long as there are benchmarks for its success, strong incentives to spur participation, and a backup plan if it does not succeed. We even agreed to the proposal in this bill to allow the PRO to receive a portion of the unclaimed deposits generated by the bottle bill program. As a reminder, for nearly 50 years, the beverage industry was allowed to keep all of the unclaimed deposits, also known as the sheets. That changed about 7 years ago. We supported the General Assembly passed the change in law so that those unclaimed deposits would go to the state instead of remaining with the beverage industry. But remember, in total, over those nearly 50 years, the industry probably collected in excess of $100 million in those unclaimed deposits. So just keep that in mind when they say how important it is that they get this money now. They got a lot of money and for nothing in particular for it beyond running the program. It was not like the proposal in this bill to say we will reimburse you for specific technology improvements at redemption. Nothing like that. It was just they got all of those tens of millions of dollars for many years. As you know, the unclaimed deposits now amount to more than $3 million a year. And that money is used to help fund clean water programs in the state. H 915 allows the PRO to seek reimbursement from the agency. Again, that's envisioned over a 4-year period at about $3.5 or up to $3.5 million. And we support this specific time-bound use of a portion of the unclaimed deposits. to go through the PRO, but ultimately to help make this program work better. And you've heard some of the reasons. I won't go through those again now, but we think that's a great use of unclaimed deposits, help make the bottle bill program work better, help redemption centers work more efficiently. That also benefits consumers, taking their cans and bottle bags. The faster process, it works well for everybody. So I think that makes sense. Small businesses, of course, receive some benefit under this proposal as well, small retailers. Those under 5,000 square feet would be exempted from the program. That's the first time ever since the bottle bill has been created that it would exempt small retailers from participation, so-called mom and pop exemption. But the reason why retailers were in from the beginning was because the theory was we want to make it just as easy to return your containers as it was to buy them in the first place. And the way you do that is make sure that where you purchase them, they will also have some mechanism by which you can take them back. But the reality is, certainly in recent years, the smaller stores are not taking a great number of containers. People are fortunately not bringing garbage bags full to their corner bodega, and expecting them to take all of those containers back. So to write them out, it was a compromise, but one that I think makes sense for the small business owners, and it's not a huge change. It was already noted, of course, that some of the large interested beverage industry went through some of the changes that will benefit them through this. There are also changes in this proposal to help redemption centers, including eliminating all of those sorts of the containers. That's a big one, and it makes a lot of sense. And the improved technology available for some is going to be an important improvement as well. These changes, particularly the technology, could help to alleviate some of the biggest challenges that redemption centers now face, which is finding enough entry-level workers to allow their business to function. For our part, we're interested in consumer convenience, and we support provisions in the bill that would have all points of redemption be redemption centers, meaning that large retail grocery stores that are selling beverage containers could no longer turn away containers of a beverage type that they don't sell. That's the law today. You only have to take back the folks who sell. They would become redemption centers. They'd have to take back anything. And I think that is reasonable, especially as we're allowing smaller retails out of the system. It also has certain provisions about a certain number per county, 3 redemption centers per county, and at least 1 in municipalities of 7,000 or more, like where we are here in Montpelier.
Smaller ones stay in if they want to,
Yes.
and they stay in without having the machine and parking.
It's a good question. I don't know this contemplated here. I think that would be the expectation. That's an excellent question. Senator might be better looking into it. It's not. It's the exemption that's written in here, but I think there's been an understanding if you want to continue to take back, you could. My guess is that would be with the provision that you don't have to take back everything, but I don't know. I don't think that's specifically addressed here. So we do have some specific proposals for improvement here for this, and
Do you have page numbers and sections?
I have, at least for most, and I heard your comments, Senator, so I was busily checking some of these. I am gonna follow up the submitting this. In section 1532, change dealing with the stewardship plan and the minimum requirements. We believe the bill does not yet go far enough to guarantee an improved process and better convenience for consumers. So here I would say, remember that as part of those negotiations, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, whenever it was, where we were talking about a redemption center for every community of 7,000 or more should at least have its own redemption center. At that time, we were talking and frankly thinking specifically about Montpelier, which had just lost its redemption center. And when I say redemption center here, I'm really talking about a business that was created primarily to take back cans and bottles. They may have had some retail too, but that was the function. Montpelier lost its redemption center. The building no longer exists. And under this law, it would make Shaw's 50 feet away from where the old redemption center was a redemption center because it's larger than 5,000 square feet and it has a couple of reverse vending machines now. But that's declaring it to be a redemption center does not mean that it was convenient for consumers in the way that a traditional redemption center was, where people were lined up with bags full of cans and bottles and knew that even if they didn't have a high-tech machine, it was going to go relatively quickly. This is a place set up to receive those kinds of things. And so I am a little concerned that when we talk about at least 3 redemption centers per county, we want to make sure that that process is one that actually works for consumers and isn't just a grocery store with an RVM machine. That's not really going to be convenient in the way that I think we are envisioning, and even for Montpelier. I'm not saying the Shaws couldn't do it, but they do need upgrades to the equipment that would allow that to work. And so when we talk about at least 3 redemption centers per county, I think the question becomes, what does that mean? You know, what kind of facilities are we really talking about? So if this law does anything, I think it must improve the redemption experience for consumers. That's kind of our position here. It shouldn't get worse for consumers, and this is a conversation we're just having with Mr. Noel. So in section 1532, 3D, page 15, lines 5 through 10, lays out collection location standards. We urge you to consider strengthening these standards by requiring that redemption centers, yes, be accessible, but also open for business at least 40 hours a week and open on at least one weekend day. These are facets of consumer convenience that are not specifically addressed, and I think could be helpful. As I've been talking with other stakeholders, some mentioned that, well, there may be facilities, I don't know, in the islands, and they're only really open in the summer, and maybe there's some exemption process that could be included for the Secretary of A&R to consider, you know, really cases that it makes sense. They don't have to be open 40 hours a week, every week, and on a weekend day. But I think for most, if that's the assumption, that would be a helpful addition here. We also encourage some criteria, and it might have to work through this with A&R about a certain minimum level of throughput that would be allowed, or the capacity of that location, for instance. It's referenced in the bill, but not with kind of specificity that gives me great comfort. And if RVMs, reverse vending machines, are used, they should have a phone number or other means of immediate reporting of problems. And malfunctions should be addressed promptly. And I don't know if you need to put in the bill that they have to be addressed within 2 days, but I think there should be some expectation that you can't have a machine that's not working for days and weeks. That just doesn't suit what I think.
Like the EV chargers out there, for example.
They tried those, but yeah, I guess it would be.
I think we have another question.
Are there actually companies that own those machines that go around and tend to them and make sure that they're emptied out regularly, or?
Yeah, it's Tomra who's in charge of a lot of that. I don't know about the ownership or the leasing agreements and so forth, but yes, the grocery stores, I don't generally own those, you know, that's a lease agreement. And we need to make sure, and I think it's entirely possible that the process works for consumers.
We've got one in my Shaw's and where I live, and it's usually full. So
it's just full, like it's not a malfunction, it's just full, and then, so that really would be the responsibility of the PRO, working with Tomra or whoever is collecting these things to ensure that that's processed, that you don't have that problem anymore. And I think the agency would say it's appropriate for the PRO to have that responsibility because the agency doesn't have the staffing to really provide that level of oversight. And that's maybe one of the reasons why we've been having that challenge now. So I'm open to the idea of the PRO that give them the authority and the responsibility and have it work better. But part of it too is just even if functioning as expected, is it truly a redemption center that people can expect to bring a larger number of containers to and have it dealt with? And I'm worried a little bit that the language here is not clear enough to ensure that that is the case. Now, I want to say that, there is one other provision in the bill. It's in the same section center, and I don't have the line, but it talks about where there are the requirement of 3 redemption centers per county, at least one of which would allow for the immediate return of deposit. It seems to me that, I don't know, if we were only dealing with 3 per county, 2 of them should have immediate return of deposit, and one of them would be the other kind. And the other kind, what many people are talking about, is a bag deposit system. So a place where you can drop your bag and you've signed up for this service, and your name and contact or code and so forth is on it, and you would have an account that is updated once those cans and bottles are actually counted or go through a machine, just like. I like the idea of bringing this technology to the state, and I could imagine for our county, Washington County, and maybe maybe it is at the Casella transfer station that there is a process set up that where people could bring their bags, drop them off and leave, and know that their account will be properly updated. It's time for Vermont to have that kind of technology, it seems to me. And I think that would be something of a game changer for consumers in the state, at least in a lot of areas, if we can have that kind of technology available. I'm not sure that there is enough throughput for every county to have this. But I have considered whether there should be a requirement of at least 3 counties in the first 2 years of the program should have a demonstration of this, should adopt a bag drop system, because it doesn't call for it specifically in the legislation now. But why don't we do it and make sure that it can work for us here in Vermont? I'm quite sure that it will, because it does work in other places. But that would be another specific suggestion from the bill.
Because you're worried that, sorry,
No, go ahead.
that it won't happen if we.
Yeah,
don't
why isn't it in the bill? I guess, Senator.
You're just worried that
I'm
Vermont
really-
won't get 21st century technology.
I'm really interested, if we're gonna support this, I'd like to know what we're getting for it, in particular for consumers, and it would give me a little more comfort to know that is one thing for sure, that at least some parts of the state, may not be 3 counties, it may be more, but something like that, I think makes sense.
Is there another question?
So, one of the municipalities in my district had a, transfer station.
Yeah.
That people could just bring their bags and they sorted them. Actually took them to the redemption center, and each, organization that wanted to be on the receiving end of it. They went in a rotational, series where somebody benefited every day. A lot of people don't want to bother taking them to the, but they will to donate them to a nonprofit or whatever. So
On Front Porch Forum, at least in this area, you can find people who will come and collect your redeemables, for their own purposes, but in other bag drop situations, you could have your account credited, or you can leave it for another nonprofit entity, for instance, would be another way to go there. So
Yeah.
I just think moving in that direction gives us one more opportunity for consumer convenience that we don't have today. And if this bill can help to bring that about, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, my understanding is these apps can say like, oh, I want my cans to go to the Boy Scouts or whatever, or to the 4-H club.
the transfer station manager changed. He went to the select board and said, I don't want to do this thing. So we're not doing it.
That's too bad. And then, of course, there will have to be some negotiation about where these facilities can be and so forth, but which is another reason why I'd like to ensure, have it be a responsibility of the PRO to make sure that at least some of these are set up, and then we can learn from that and hopefully grow that process. But I do think that's different, and particularly given my kind of concerns about just declaring grocery stores to be redemption centers. That doesn't make me think that it's gonna be all that convenient.
Yes, go ahead.
So the other thing to hear making note is that, Greenwood County, on one hand, could be a meaningless number because there are some counties where if you're gonna drop off where you're gonna drop off, you're not going to the other end of the county. And they're all, but I assume there's language that talks about geographic distribution and or accessibility within counties, because I know there are places in Bennington County where people from one end might go to the other end, twice a year.
Literally, yeah, right.
And that's true. I assume that's true in these places, yeah.
Yes, Senator, but here I think is another area, particularly as I'm about to move into the handling fee conversation and the importance of keeping our redemption centers open, viable, functioning. Because where this bill grants the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, this is something that came in very late in the House of consideration of the bill, grants the Secretary the authority to change the minimum number or change the number. And to I shouldn't say drop below 3, but to say, I will exempt large retailers from having to comply or to participate as well. That would be within the authority of the secretary. It's not something that I particularly support. However, examples are given, there are certain areas where large grocery stores are essentially across the street from each other. And does it really make sense for both of them to have a redemption center function? Maybe not, but I would then say there should be tight criteria by which an exemption could be granted for a large retailer. It has to be within a mile or something like that, because otherwise, as you think about the handling fee negotiations between the PRO and the redemption centers, or even the grocers acting as redemption centers, it says that the PRO has an interest in ensuring that these facilities remain open and available. Otherwise, they would have to open their own to meet the minimum standards. But there aren't too many counties that I think would have fewer than 3 redemption centers if you began to consider. I should ask you, Senator, if you considered every large grocer a redemption center. Do we even have a county that doesn't have at least 3 now? Maybe.
Grocers?
Yes, larger than 5,000 square feet.
Essex County,
But this is a question.
yeah, or in Grand Isle.
On the Caledonia does. Orleans? I don't know.
I think I haven't seen the number. I haven't seen the number. And I think it'd be interesting for the conversation. And I guess my bigger point is, if in larger counties, this clearly have well in excess of 3 large retailers that would qualify. Does that mean the PRO could then negotiate very tough handling fee? You know, well, we'll pay you 2 cents because we've already got our 3. And we know that we're gonna meet that standard. I'd hate to see, in other words, this bill used in any way to reduce the number of convenient redemption center opportunities that are available. And while I don't think that's necessarily done, because it's nefarious, but I think the language here could potentially allow for that, and it does give a great deal of power to the PROs. So this brings me to the handling fee. We're very concerned about the proposal on page 3 to eliminate the handling fee and what implications that would mean for the redemption centers.
Handling fee?
That's the page 3, lines 17, 19. It's just where it takes it out. It says it does not apply to the PRO, to any containers that are in this program. So going forward, it's an expectation that you no longer would have a set 3.5 cent.
Page 4.
I apologize.
Yeah, no, it's okay, it's okay.
Thank you for that.
I'm a stickler.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. But there is a significant imbalance of power between the professionals representing a PRO and redemption centers that are out there. And without more specificity, you've heard some of this conversation already. We're concerned about that negotiation process. Also, I think this is really important. The rationale, I guess, for this provision to eliminate the set handling fee is twofold. One, there's a belief among some that redemption centers are just making too much money under the current handling fee. And 2, that the PRO needs a financial incentive to encourage investment in redemption centers, that investment for the new technology. Well, let's address the first point. There is no evidence that I've seen to back up the idea that redemption centers are raking in an offensive profit. And even if some of them are doing well, since when is it the state's job to put its thumb on the scale in favor of large beverage industry over hardworking retention centers? The fact is, while we see no evidence to justify the elimination of the set handling fee, there's plenty of reason to believe that it's a bad idea. One, consider, for instance, the costs of the redemption centers. The handling fee for commingled containers is 3.5 cents, and it's been that since 2008. While that was a sustainable number maybe 20 years ago, it no longer, in many cases, covers the cost of doing business today. Adjusted for inflation, 3.5 cents in 2008 dollars would be worth 5.2 cents today. So the meaning that the centers are operating at a significant loss compared to what the fee was just 18 years ago. Think about other expenses. The economic landscape for the state has changed significantly since then. While the handling fees remain frozen, primary costs of running the business, labor, rent, insurance, utilities have surged. The most significant driver of this gap is the minimum wage. Support.
I don't think you thought to do this.
Well, I just want to point out, the minimum wage was $7.68 in 2008. In January, it went to $14.42. That's an increase of 87.7%, while the handling fee has remained the same.
Can I ask some questions? I agree with Senator Baumgart's, I'm looking at this paragraph on page 4 and I'm trying to understand it, and this I think is why I didn't quite understand where this was in the bill. So the handling fee right now is paid to anybody who handles the bottles, so the redemption centers, does it also go for
Grocers, anybody who's taking back,
anybody who's taking back but if it's for, is there a handling fee for just the
Water.
recycling of bottles that don't have
No.
that are not part of the bottle bill?
No.
Okay, so this is not going to wine bottles that are going through our regular system,
Correct.
okay, or our other system, the blue bin system. So, this is why this is increasing it from 4 to 5 cents for commingling programs?
yeah, the idea there was an incentive to encourage more of the beverage manufacturers to participate in the program that Bree Deatley was talking about, that makes it easier so that they should all go in together. You shouldn't require that your brand remains separate. That's a hassle. That's a
Okay.
significant hassle. About 80, somewhere north of 80% of the containers are in the commingled agreement now, I believe, in the state.
Okay,
But if these outliers continue to be problematic for redemption centers, anybody taking back these, because they have to find a cardboard box for every single.
I see, okay.
Mhm.
But then what, so I don't understand why the House would be increasing the fee and then just
That was
next
it.
line saying, oh, we're not.
That will all
You're
go
part of
away.
this program, you don't get any of this money.
That will all go away. The theory is that's only going to be in place for a period of time that until this new law kicks in.
Oh, I
So
see.
that would be replaced.
I see, okay, that was counterintuitive
Yeah.
to me, I'm like, okay, we're.
Yeah, no, that's
increasing the
history.
fee and
That's a
then
little
this
bit of
thing-
history there.
Okay, that's helpful to understand, but yeah, I don't understand though why we would not pay the redemption centers, still pay them a handling fee if they're part of the PRO program.
I would suggest, so, but I know there's another question, Shannon.
Well,
Go ahead.
Sure.
well, this is, go ahead.
Okay.
We really haven't done the bill, right?
No, well, we've walked through it.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah,
So let me say, Senator, that our suggestion would be to maintain a floor, a handling fee floor of 3.5 cents. That ought to be reviewed and perhaps adjusted every 2 years, as Mr. Noel said, Mike Noel, about because, you know, if you don't put in an automatic increase as we do for the minimum wage, then at least you should be reviewing it. You should go,
Yeah.
you can't expect these places to stay in business.
Well, and with our, sorry to interrupt you, but I think we have other PROs, and you know a lot more about them than I do, that have fees involved. And I think we just did one last year where there was some fee involved and they wanted to set a fee and we were like, heck, wait. It was the paint,
Yes.
yeah, thank you, Senator. And it was like, oh wait, we're the fee setters, the legislature is, we're not gonna just let this PRO set a fee in a week. So seems like consistent with what we've said in the past, that at the very least, there needs to be sort of some check-in on it.
Yeah, we're concerned with the language here now, and this is
Yeah.
what causes us not to support the bill as written, because I think this handling fee is really for us perhaps the most important thing to try to amend and get right. Recognize too that of all the extended producer responsibility programs that the state runs, paint is a little bit different, but none of them is the state giving money to the manufacturers to run the extended producer responsibility program, because by definition, it's supposed to be their responsibility to do it.
Right.
It's the cost of doing business. It's supposed to be borne by them. But in this case, again, because it's not just going to the beverage industry, it's going for these improvements. To me, in my mind, you can have the agency making these same investments, and that would be a wonderful use of the unclaimed deposits to make sure that the process, have the technology to work better. So the fact that it goes through the PRO, we're not going to oppose that, but it's not really just giving it to the PRO as we did for nearly 50 years. Okay, so can I?
sure, well, I'm just wanting to pause here a minute. If there's any other handling questions, yes, go.
So I've talked to, Redemption Center in my district that also has a retail operation. He thinks that they should put a deposit on wine bottles. And You know, I don't wanna go there if it's not in the zone, but, because there's a lot of moving parts to it.
Senator, I would say that most states, nearly every state that has a bottle bill has expanded the scope since the laws were initially adopted. Maine's, for instance, covers more than 90% of the beverage containers sold in Maine, where ours covers about 46% of the beverage containers sold here. However, there isn't broad enough agreement that this is the time to think about expansion or an increase in the deposit. So we are not proposing it, and we're looking for a bill where there is largely a large area of consensus and some hope that we can get there on the parts where there's a little bit of disagreement now. So.
And if I can jump in on that as well, because I agree with you, but it also seems like it's worthwhile to try to like fix the system or get it out of trouble that it's in right now before an expansion happens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was the logic.
Yes.
There was a bill a couple of years ago that did all of the things,
Yeah.
and it was a little too much at one time.
Cool.
And if these changes can, it really, it's an opportunity to provide benefits to nearly every interested stakeholder here, from the beverage industry to small mom and pop stores, certainly consumers or environmental benefits, and I think to redemption centers, if we can get this handling fee right, we'll make the whole thing work better, and then you can consider what kind of updates or modernization might be on that. But yes, that's the idea. Now, let me say, with respect to handling fee, I do think if you want to allow negotiations between the PRO and individual redemption centers to determine an increase an increase in their handling fee, that might make sense, you know, so you can have a floor, but I'm not suggesting that necessarily needs to be. Because people have pointed out that the costs to run the redemption center are different in different places, and that is true. Throughput matters, and all of these things. I just wouldn't want to go below the floor, because I just don't think that makes sense for reasons that we've stated. Now, on the second point, this is regarding the need for an incentive for the PRO to make these investments. I think that there's some merit and value to that, but that incentive could be provided simply by allowing negotiations for a lower handling fee as part of the agreement between the PRO and the redemption center that receives the new technology, because that new technology would be cost-saving infrastructure for the redemption center owner. So they could say, well, your cost is going to go from maybe it's 4 cents a container down to 2 cents, and you don't need to have all this labor. And that's a big hassle that you could avoid by having this technology. Bless you. I think then you can negotiate perhaps down from 3.5 cents, or at least leave open that possibility. All I'm saying is to preserve the incentive piece of the rationale for doing this. I think you could do it without getting rid of the whole handling fee. Just have that apply only to those situations. And I think it's envisioned somewhere between 20 and 30. When they have 3.5 million and these machines cost 100 grand at least, you know, negotiate only in those cases if you want to consider a possible lower handling fee. All right, so those are our specific recommendations. There's some language I think that we and others are going to submit there. Here's another issue I think is worth noting though, and that is what happens if the PRO doesn't form? And you heard that there are challenges in Connecticut, and Maine has had some different challenges. The bill contains on page 11, line 11, if I have this correct, Senator, an assessment of 10% of an additional 10% on top of the cost of the stewardship plan, total cost of the stewardship
I have
plan.
it as page 12, line 2.
Okay, maybe there's either I have it, but thank you.
No worries.
Well, the draft I was looking at, anyway,
Right.
it's in that. Right, sure, it's from you, I'm not sure. But then 10%, now we strongly recommend a higher assessment with the hopes that it will never be needed. So I think a 10% penalty in this case may be insufficient. The amount does not meaningfully incentivize participation, nor does it reflect the added burden that would be placed on the agency if it really were required to step up for non-compliant producers. So we urge the committee to consider a penalty assessment of 50 to 100% of the costs on non-compliant producers. This could help Vermont to avoid the kind of foot dragging and failure from producers to create a PRO that we've seen in Connecticut as an example.
Can I ask about that? Wait, this language doesn't
Oh, I see. The opening language is if no producer responsibility organization is formed, then this 10% will be, okay,
Exactly right.
got it.
Which is the same as, or at least very similar to the language that we had in the household hazardous waste EPR, so.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, under the federal the hazardous, federal Superfund law for hazardous waste sites, for instance, if the responsible parties there don't act to clean up those sites, they face treble damages, triple the costs of cleanup. If EPA has to step in and do the cleanup in that case, you're gonna pay 3 times the cost of what it costs them to do that. So I'm not even going that high, but I do think something in excess of 10%. I mean, if they're gonna do it, that's great. This never comes into play. But why not have it be a little bit more of a meaningful incentive? My next point is one we already addressed a little bit, and that is the incentive, section 1532B. I have it as page 14 lines 4 through 8, but I'm not, maybe my copy is a little bit different, but 1532B, and this is the the A&R's power to alter the number of redemption points based on the adequacy of redemption service in a given area. So the minimum, again, is the 3 per count, and we talked about that. I am a little concerned about the room given that could result in something that we don't want to see, which would be fewer convenient redemption center options for consumers. So we are talking with the agency and others about some language there, and I just think that could be tightened. As I say, I think stronger criteria for possible retailer exemptions, including proximity to other redemption centers, is important. I would have to be pretty tight, yes, if you're across the street or if you're within 1 mile, the secretary could grant an exemption. But honestly, it's not entirely clear here how it's not clear at all how that process is going to work. So if you have all these groceries, is it just a mad race to request an exemption? And the last one to put in a request is the one that gets stuck running the redemption center? I don't know, and it's not really spelled out here. And I just don't want to be in a place like 10 miles. That would perhaps take a lot of retailers out. You think about Burlington, downtown Burlington, City Market, well, they're within 10 miles of Redemption Center in Winooski. That's probably a dense enough area, they have to have one of some sort, but I think, the point here is that it could deserve a closer look to ensure that we aren't going too far to create convenience for the businesses without considering convenience for consumers.
I mean, do you think this, just saying out loud, like some kind of criteria based on population density and distance between redemption centers? Because there's a difference between downtown Burlington versus
Absolutely.
even Addison County versus Northeast Cape in terms of just distances.
Yeah, I think it's, what I've been hearing is the rationale for this, people are typically referring to Chittenden County. Oh, this grocery store right across the street. Okay, I get it, but if it's not right across the street, how far away is reasonable?
Don't always refer to Chittenden.
And that's my point is that, if that's the problem you want to deal with, you could do that with a very tight circle. Otherwise we really are talking about, all the grocers now, unless they already have an exemption, and there aren't that many that do, have to take back cans and bottles today. And again, I just think, I would hate to see this law become the reason why we end up having fewer and fewer redemption opportunities. So the point is made here. Okay, so I'm almost done here. I think my last point is that the PRO itself should be a nonprofit organization with board members representing some of the diverse interests that stakeholders have in the bottle bill program. I would say you should have a redemption center owner on the board of the PRO as an example. There may be situations where, as a board member, they would have to recuse themselves from certain decisions about handling fee for their business or something like that, of course. But this happens with nonprofit boards all the time, that people, find ways to recuse themselves when that is necessary. But I think there is broad agreement, but I don't think it's gotten into the bill, unless I've missed it, that would actually have this be a nonprofit organization. I believe that's the way Maine's is kind of working now, and it's at least worth considering, I think, and as we have some concerns raised about the power and authority of the PRO, I think that would be ameliorated to some extent by having it be a nonprofit organization, so whether.
Is that how many other ones are that we have set up?
I think, I can't remember,
For paint and.
I feel like that sounds familiar, so I couldn't say for sure. But that'd be a good Michael Grady question. I'm gonna go with another question.
It seems like a lot of runway on this bill. Do you obviously testify in the House?
Several times.
Okay.
Yes. And again, this bill, the conversation started in 2025, of course, because you recall the last bill was passed in 23 and vetoed by the governor in 23. And finally it was, the votes took place in 24. I think that override didn't succeed. And so that took care of it for 24, but in 25, the conversation started in the House Environment Committee and carried over to 26. So when we talk about versions of the bill, there were multiple versions, formal and informal, but as introduced, because it was a committee bill, this is the one that hit the floor.
Christy Morris standing on the floor and pouring out the bottle that wasn't by end of that means.
Exactly right, exactly right, and it does a great job.
I think every biennium that I've been here, we've had a different version of it, yeah.
And I would say, there are a number of other points, at least half a dozen or more that others have raised, that we are in conversation with, and we'll submit some more testimony around those, but it's not worth, the smaller points that we're getting into here now. But on the handling fee, Susan Collins mentioned that there's a timing issue there. I think that's true. It's just that I hope not to face that, because if you keep a floor, you don't lose the whole thing. So that's why I didn't focus on that piece. But there are a number of good points raised by others who testified here today. But I'm really grateful that you're going to hear from Redemption Center owners, several tomorrow, because their perspective, I think, is really important. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Any other questions at this point? And so it sounded like you were also gonna follow up with some written suggestions in it, because I also heard language suggestions, which is also very helpful. So great. Happy to have it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Any thoughts or comments about what we've heard on the bottle bill so far this morning? If not, that's fine.
Stuff to work on.
Yes, stuff to work on. I was, yeah, I will say, I mean, I'm thinking very much about the timeline moving forward and how short it is. And so what I'm hearing is that, well, what my sense is that we should have a new draft at some point. And we could create something like that in the spirit of like, it's easier to cross things out rather than add things. I don't want to move quicker than we're ready to move, and we're gonna hear more tomorrow. But I at least want to put out there that I'm thinking about getting a new draft of this based on what we're.
After tomorrow.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be for.
And we're getting 3 sets of written suggestions.
Yeah.
So,
And they might be.
have those in front of us, something.
Yes.
Yeah, it might be helpful for us to have that conversation about what we want to put in.
Sure, before we
Yeah.
actually move forward with that. So if we can look at those, so just to talk to, one thing that might be helpful is once we have all those written suggestions, to get Ledge Council in here and walk through the suggestions and see what makes sense, what do we want to do, and have that be the spark for new draft.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay, great, super. Thank you. Sounds okay to you, Senator Beckett, sounds okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, super. Now, we did have a few folks cancel with us today, so we are running early. I did also have on the agenda the budget, though I'm not sure, or our budget letter, though I'm not sure that we have anything to add or change at this point. We really are only going to be hearing from the PUC about their budget tomorrow. And then we'll need to make some decisions. We can have that conversation Friday, I suppose. That's our last day to.
It'd be nice if we could take, had some way to take all 3 recommendations for change and consolidate them,
Mhm.
or we could actually have them all on one sheet of paper. We could-
For this bill?
Yeah, we could get that. That could.
That would be interesting.
We've heard, Susan Collins submitted her testimony and Bree
Okay.
has now, but still not.
From
Noel.
Paul, from Paul, Michael.
Michael.
Like Noel, did we submit?
I think having them side by side would be helpful, because I'd like to see, because they're all a little different, and I
Yeah.
wonder, you know, I don't know. They all have slightly different angles on the whole
Mhm.
thing too.
Section by section, those there.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
Right, I think it may be too much to try to consolidate all the recommendations into one document, but I think if we just take our time to walk through it and look at all the suggested changes. I guess I will just say too, like, I'm very sympathetic to wanting to protect our redemption centers
Yeah.
and make sure that they are,
Don't need fewer.
We don't need
We're gonna get our
Yeah.
district large one.
yes, yes.
Which ones are we going, I just reached out to one in my district, and
Let's look.
you were, do you want to talk to me?
Yeah.
This is who I talked to.
We have four,
Yes,
No, he's limited development.
sorry,
I know, sure.
okay, sorry.
yes.
So,
Well,
if we get them
for frequent fire restaurant.
No, okay. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, so we do have 4 folks on the list for tomorrow, from redemption centers. Beverage Baron is in very, there's one from Putney, Linden, Phil, and what was the?
Brattleboro.
And Brattleboro. Open to having more folks, testify, that's lovely. These folks, came up because they were on the House list.
Okay, I just reached out to a redemption center in Bristol.
Okay.
And if he gets back to me and wants to testify.
Yeah.
My testifiers,
I asked them to submit written testimony.
Mhm. Okay, so let's. Continue to communicate about that. I think I have a question
no,
for
just,
you with that, but
if they can get the testimony that we got today. I can run through it and I can look at recommendations. Be nice if they had the last paragraph,
Mhm.
recommended changes.
Okay, so. Any other thoughts or comments about that, who we're hearing from on redemption centers? Okay, I think that will, like, walking through this, will probably need to happen next week.
Yeah, because Scott, D3 or D5 couldn't come today.
Yeah, there's a few folks who had canceled today who wanted to testify, so.
We get everything by Friday, we can, man.
Oh, sure.
That's for the hard copies.
Oh, hard copies of
When
the
we're
suggestion.
All of suggestions.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, fully
marking
agree.
up bills, I agree.
Yeah. That'll be,
I don't know what you're looking.
oh, so, well, I'm sorry, when, so we've got written suggestions now from 3 of them. But even as we get some from Michael
Yeah.
Noel and
Yeah.
from Paul Burns, would love printed copies of all of their written suggestions. Yeah, that'd be great, and I think I think we're looking to get those potentially by Friday.
Sure.
So, great, yeah,
Soon as they.
okay, super. Okay, and no other comments?
This is what I'm like, trying. I mean, if I don't know anything like that.
We don't have a ton of time on. We won't have a ton of time on Friday for the budget conversation, so. One goal could be that for tomorrow, we get. The scope of what we want to include in our letter. And then Friday, we can focus our conversation on prioritizing. Does that sound reasonable? As a way to sort of step into that?
But just the budget part?
For just the budget letter, yeah,
Okay, we're having a committee discussion tomorrow after we hear from.
yes, yep, so who should be in? And then that'll be the question for Thursday, and then for Friday, the question will be, how do we order it?
Okay, do we? This is still the,
Yes, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it,
Two more people submit, I don't know if you have it on that sheet, but no. The people that testified yesterday,
yep, so I do have an updated version, which I could send to folks. That has the information for Working Lands Coalition and Serve Learn Earn. And I had included the dam safety fund. As a placeholder, but no one's really talked about that, so I'm happy to. Take that out for now, since we're not really.
well, there's a dam safety bill,
Yes.
and then that has 375 and.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, and the dam safety bill was really about, a
That
pilot
right.
for the emergency operations.
At the time, safety fund. Is what?
Oh, the dam safety fund is a fund that we had, capitalized last year to, help with the repair and removal of dams. But at this point, I don't know that again, that was like a placeholder, but I'm again, happy to take that out since we have
and
really not.
we wanted to hear from Eric Foran, who that's his name, the.
Yes.
He can't come, of course, until next week on Wednesday.
Yes, well, but he was on the bill.
Yeah.
778.
Yeah, I didn't know if you remember.
Yeah. Oh, and we do have, the updated version does have the farm security fund as well. So there were those three things. I think there were two more that Jerry had. That were not included here, I think I've got those on the list, so.
He had something.
He had something about, the CAFOs.
CAFOs, yes,
Yeah, and then
something.
it's the salt bill, but that's already on our list. I think those were the two things.
I seem to remember that there were two things that he. Oh, chloride, he had 300,000 for 2 additional FTEs for the DEC Rivers program. To assist with the Flood Safety Act. That was another one that was not in here, but everything else that. It was the CAFOs and the DEC Rivers program that were the only two that were not captured here.
What about this false man?
We don't have that on the list, we could.
Did we hear about that for 325 and 325?
I think we. I'm not check on maybe.
You didn't include that in the bill,
Maybe we didn't take the vote we did.
I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
Well, I feel like if
Think
it.
about it, I thought we did.
Yeah.
I feel like if we did, it was not, it was sort of a side issue, it was not the point. We could try to get a little testimony about the municipal planning agreements, try to put that in before Friday, if that's of interest.
Is it, do they not have more money that's?
Don't think so. And so it's such an important way. What is the help municipalities step up. So the way without that, it's missing. But I don't know the number, so I just came in as we're looking at this, I was thinking.
Do you have a sense of who might be a good person to speak to them? Okay. Well, let's talk about that because we're running out of runway. So. But if we could think of who could speak to that and get a little testimony.
Rapto or the LCT?
Yeah.
Could be ACCD, I don't know. could be. Okay,
We could, with like, what's, yeah.
okay, and let's think about that. And that's fair. Okay,
Are we?
well, I think we're done.
We're done?
I think we're
Okay.
done. And unless folks have other thoughts or comments. On this, so tomorrow, who's in, who's out, Friday, prioritize. Then